Hello, and welcome to Down the Rabbit Hole. My name is Breezy, and here we talk about many topics that don't necessarily fit in with dark academia, but it's still very interesting to actually sit down and talk about. We are currently on episode 5, and we're going to be talking about the Eastern State Penitentiary. Now, you're probably wondering, why am I talking about this prison? Well, I went down the rabbit hole of some of the most haunted places that you can go and visit, and this was on my list. So, with that being said, why don't we dive into today's episode, shall we? So, the Eastern State Pen is in Philadelphia. It is a former prison that housed more than 75,000 inmates over a period of 142 years, from 1829 to 1971. There are no executions that ever happened at the Eastern State Pen, but there are some eerie noises that sometimes can be heard in the hallways. Now, the Eastern State Pen um, is in the city of brotherly love and is located in the Fairmont section of the city. And the pen has refined the revolutionary system of separate incarceration that first pioneered at the Wall Street jail, which emphasized the principles and reforms rather than punishment. But it housed criminals like Al Capone, my favorite criminal of all time. Yes, I know it's strange to say that I have a favorite criminal of all time, but he's also the most known criminal of all time. You can actually go on my True Crime Lounge one and we talk about my favorite Valentine's Day of all time, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. I hate Valentine's Day. I'm gonna go ahead and put that out there. To me, it's like an overrated holiday. And I know people say, "Oh, you'll change your mind when you get in a relationship." No, I hate the holiday in general. I really do. But and a lot of people are very shocked to find out that it's like that's your favorite holiday. But you see, like someone who loves love. Here's the thing: I love love, but I also hate Valentine's Day. I don't have to like Valentine's Day to love love. I know that's a misconception that draws a lot of people off. But anyway, back to the episode. Before the role of the Colores Massacre in 1934, James Bruno and several other male relatives were incarcerated between 1935 and 1948 before they were paroled. And after its completion, the building was the largest and most expensive public structure located ever erected in the United States, and it quickly became a model for more than 300 prisons worldwide. Now, the prison is currently a U.S. National Historic Landmark, which is open to the public as a museum of tours 6 days a week, but not on Tuesdays. Okay. And I would totally tour this place. Honestly, I really also want to tour Alcatraz. So I've been to Alcatraz East in Gatlinburg, but I want to go to Alcatraz. Don't judge. I can see all the whole Pinterest comments like Al Capone and all of that. So yes, but here's the thing: he was the jailed for the most ironic thing, and not the thing that most people would have thought he got jailed for. But what about the Eastern State Pen? Well, it was originally named the Cherry Hill State Prison, and it's so. Mm, and it was sited for more than 10 acres of elevated farmland known as Cherry Hill near Philadelphia, and when the construction will commence in 1822. So it was designed by John Haviland, opened in October 25th, 1829, and is considered to be one of the first true penitentiaries, with 7 corridors of heated and skylighted cells capable of holding 500 convicts in isolation. Now, the Eastern State Revolutionary systems of incarceration was dubbed the Pennsylvania system. And this basically encouraged separate confinements in the form of rehabilitation. Um, and the warden was legally required to visit each of the inmates every day, and seers were mandated to see inmates 3 times a day. In the Pennsylvania state system, the Pennsylvania system was opposed by contemporaries by the Auburn system, also known as the New York system, in which held prisoners that should be forced to work um, together in silence. and it could be subjected to physical punishment as well. And although the Auburn system was favored in the U.S., the Eastern States radial floor plan. Hey, Reese Roo. My roommate's dog here, y'all. She's adorable. She's so sweet. Yes. But anyway, system of solitary confinement. But there was many critics and activist John Mill in 1841 expressed their revulsion of the international reputation of a nation that broke away from all its bands and fetters and letters only 50 to 60 years ago, and basically overthrew prisons, palaces, thrones, and marched toward universal emancipation, and was already renowned throughout the whole earth for her prisons, her manacles, and her badges of servitude. Now, originally, the inmates they were housed in a cells that could only be accessed by entering through a small exercise yard attached to the back of the prison in a small portal just large enough to pass meals. Open onto the block cells in the design proved to be impractical in the middle of construction. Cells were constructed and that allowed prisoners to enter and leave the cells through the metal doors, and the doors that were covered by heavy wooden doors to fill out noise. Now, the halls were designed to have the feel of the feel of a church. So, and some believe that the doors were so small so the prisoners would have a harder time getting out, mimicking um this girl's gonna crack me up over here, but it's minimizing the attack of an officer. Others have explained that the small doors are forced the prisoners to bow down entering the cell while entering the cell. And this design is related to the penance and ties of religious inspiration of the prison. And the cells were made of concrete with single glass skylight representing the eye of God, and suggesting that the prisoners um, are always watching them. To the prisoners, that God is always watching them. So, outside the cell, there was an individual area for exercise enclosed by a high wall, and so prisoners could not communicate. Exercise time of each prison was synchronized, so no two prisoners next to each other would be out at the same time. Now, prisoners were also allowed to garden and even keep pets if they in the exercise yards. So when the prisoners left his cell, an accompanying guard would wrap a hood over his head to prevent him from being recognized by the prisoners. And cell accommodations were also advanced for their times, including a faucet with running water over a flush toilet, as well as a curved pipes along the one wall, which served as the central housing heating during the winter months, where hot water would be ran through the pipes and keep the cells reasonably heated, and toilets were also remotely flushed twice a week by the guards of the cell block. Now, the original design of the building was for a 71 cell, 7 one-story cell blocks, but by the time the cell blocks were completed, the prison was already over capacity. And over many cell blocks had 2 floors. There were two, and toward the end, cell blocks 14 and 15 were hastily built due to overcrowding, and they were built and designed by prisoners. And cell block 15 was far for the worst behaved prisoners, and the guards who gated them off completely entirely. Now, inmates were punished with the individual treatment at the time of punishment was thought to be the most effective, and they would be separated from the others. So, what about the 20th century now? Well, in 1924, Pennsylvania Governor Guilford Pinchot allegedly sentenced Pep, the cat murdering dog. This was an actual dog now. Let's go ahead and verify. I'm just saying that, verifying that. This was an actual dog. And I'm not joking when I say that. to a life sentence at the Eastern State. And Pep allegedly murdered the governor's wife's cherished cat. And prisoner records reflect that Pep was assigned um to an inmate number, which is seen in his mugshot. See, the more I talk about this, the more I really want to go see this place and tour it. But a contemporary newspaper article reported that the governor donated his dog to the prison to increase inmate morale. So on April 3rd, 1945, a major escape was carried out by 12 inmates, who over the course of a year managed to dig an undiscovered 97-foot tunnel under the prison wall. And during the renovations in the 1930s, an additional 30 incomplete inmate dug tunnels were discovered, and it was designated by the National Historic Landmark in 1965. The prison was closed in 1971, and many prisoners and guards were transferred to Greater Ford Prison, which was about 31 miles northwest of the Eastern State. Now, the city of Philadelphia purchased the property with the intention of redeveloping the site and has several proposals, including a mall and luxury apartment complex surrounded by an old prison walls. And during the abandoned era, a forest grew in the cells, blocks, and outside within the walls. The prison became known home to many stray cats. In 1988, the Eastern State Pen Task Force successfully petitioned Mayor Wilson Good to halt redevelopment. In 1994, and it would open up to the public for history tours. See? Come on now. So, what do we want to know? Well, it was a typical cell, and everything. And typical cell that was restored that was so a typical cell in restored condition, the solitary confinement eventually collapsed due to overcrowding, and by 1913 the Eastern State officially abandoned the solitary system and operated a congregate prison until it closed in 1970, and the Eastern State was briefly used to house inmates in 1971 after a riot at Holzberg's prison. Now, you probably wanted to know, what about the cell of the most famous inmate prisoner that's most notable to me anyway? Probably you. Come on. Who doesn't want to know about Al Capone? Well, the prison was one of the largest public works in the early republic, and it was a tourist destination in the 19th century. Notable visitors would include Charles Dickens, Alexis de Tocqueville. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I'm terrible with names, so but we also have the most notable inmates would include Willie Sutton and Al Capone in 1921. And visitors also spoke with prisoners in the cell, proving the inmates were not isolated. And though the prisoners themselves were not isolated to have allowed to have visits from friends and family during the day as well. Now, most of the early prisons were petty criminals incarcerated for various robberies and theft charges. But for the time offenders, it often served 2 years. Now, the pen was intended to simply punish, but not move the criminals toward a spiritual reflection and charge. And while some argue that the Pennsylvania system was Quaker inspired, there have been little evidence to support this. And the organization that promoted the Eastern State creation, the Society of Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons, were less than half Quaker and was led by nearly 50 years in the Philadelphia's Anglican Bishop William White. Now, proponents of the system strongly believe that the criminals exposed and silenced to the thoughts and behavior of the ugliness of their crime and would become genuinely penitent. So, in reality, the guards and the counselors of the facility were designed a variety of physical and psychological torture and regiments for various infractions, including dousing prisoners in freezing waters outside during winter months and chaining their tongues um, to wrist in fashion and struggling against the chains and could caused the tongue to tear, so strapping prisoners into chairs while tight leather restraints day in, day out, and putting the worst behaved prisoners in a pit called the hole. And an underground cell block dug under cell block 14, where there was no light and no human contact and little food as far as 2 weeks. So, what about the prison reform and rehabilitation? In in the 1920s, SCI grads were open, and after a disturbance occurred in the eastern state, and the Pennsylvania Prison Board opened Bradford to assume functions previously held by Eastern State. Prior to the closing in late 1969, Eastern State Penn, then known as the State Correctional Institution, had established as far as reaching programs of group therapy with goals of having inmates involved. Now, from 1967, where the plan was initiated, the program appears to have been moderately successful, and many inmates were involved in the groups that were voluntarily. Now, an interesting aspect was the groups were led by 2 therapists, and one from the psych or social work staff, and eventually a second from the prison officer staff. So, what about the architectural significance? We'll start with the cross section of cell block. So, when the Eastern State Pen was erected in 1829 in Francisville, it was the largest and most expensive public structure. The architectural significance first arose in 1821 when British architecture John Hallivan was chosen to design the building, and he found most of his inspiration for the pen from prisons and asylums built in the 1780s in England and Ireland. He also gave a neo-Gothic look to instill fear into those thought of the committing a crime. So you just can also follow my Dark Academia Queen podcast. Now, these complexes consist of cell wings radiating from semi to full circle array in the center tower, whence the prison could be kept under constant surveillance. And the design for the pen was Haviland device became known as the hub and spoke plan, which consisted of an octagonal center connection of corridors to 7 radiating single cell blocks, each containing 2 ranges of single cells, with hot water heating, a water tap toilet, and an individual exercise yards at the same width and cell. So, there were also rectangular openings in the cell with food and work materials that could be passed to the prisoner, as well as peepholes for the guards to observe the prisoners without being seen. Now, to minimize opportunities for communication between inmates, he also designed a basic flush toilet for each cell with individual pipes leading to the central sewer. Here's that gets disgusting after a while. Not gonna lie on that one. But despite his best efforts, prisoner um so he completed the architecture of the Eastern State Pen in 1836, and each cell was lit only with a single lighting source from either skylights or windows. Um, Now, how is it a modern day historic site? Well, it operates as a museum and historic site and is open year round. There are many guided tours, self guided audio tours as well, and a scavenger hunt for children. Now, and visitors are allowed to walk several marked solitary confinement cells, but most of them remain off limits as filled with the original rubble and debris from the years of neglect. The city skyline of Philadelphia is visible to the prison courtyard, which still has the original baseball backstop and a chain link fence of the outfield wall. The outer prison wall in an attempt to keep run balls inside the ground. In addition, Eastern State holds many events throughout the year. So, what about the restoration that came? Well, The facility was kept in a preserved ruin, meaning no significant renovations or restoration was attempted until 1991. The Pew Charitable Trust provided funding and stabilized the preservation efforts to begin. But that is it for this episode. What do y'all think of the Eastern State Pen and everything? But I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a great day.